What's good, everybody? It's your boy Insight Motherfucking 11, man, and tapping in real quick to discuss and speak about the mental illness that I've categorized as repetitive error syndrome, where repetitive error syndrome is just a spirit that's stuck inside of a mind that's playing out behaviors throughout their body of constantly going through the same problems, constantly going through the same experiences, constantly going through the same bullshit, where it's just kind of like Groundhog's Day, where a person is constantly repeating the same mistakes, repeating the same problems, but not necessarily having a sufficient way to get out of these things and shit like that, right? So a person that's experiencing repetitive error syndrome is a person that keep committing the same mistakes, the same errors mentally because of a lack of ability to self-diagnose and self-correct and shit like that, and create a remedy for that mental error that's going on. And that mental error is just a sequence of thoughts and feelings that's creating some type of self-delusion that's separating them from the true nature of the world around them, and where it's like they're almost like dislodged, or they're almost like in their own world, creating their own delusion about reality, but never actually doing anything about reality, where that sequence of thoughts and feelings can become so tight, so tightly knitted to the point that it's kind of like a rope, where a person would create a sequence of thoughts and feelings, a form of like communication internally, aka the DNA and shit, like aka a pattern and shit like that, where a person might not realize that those thoughts and feelings, that pattern is inspired by a motive that is below the detection threshold and shit like that. And if they don't know how to if they don't know how to practice any form of like self-regulation and shit like that, which is just a form of knowing how to govern yourself, because you first have to know how to govern your own thoughts and feelings, because like your chakras, your thoughts and feelings, these are like your little children, and sometimes you gotta not do everything that your children is telling you. So just because you got a thought on your mind, just because you got a feeling on your mind, doesn't necessarily mean that that's the feeling that you should bring forward into a behavior and shit like that. A lot of these thoughts and feelings in our mind is shit that need to be examined. And when you examine these things enough, you start to, aka doing the shadow work, you start to see, okay, all these things are just different manifestations of that failed motive that a person may not be able to do that they may have not been able to do when they was a kid. So what happens is they nature kind of get perverted and reversed into some form of like anger issues, some type of like frustration issues that's experienced internally, and they just end up creating a bunch of thoughts and feelings around that and shit like that, right? Where that's literally a person talking to their own demon all the time, and then it's like where a person would just take the back seat and let kind of like the idea of, okay, let Jesus take the wheel. Okay, like God's gonna do it. But if you don't know what's actually going on in your mind, you could be like very much like basically possessed into some form of like self-delusion, where you can't necessarily separate from that self-delusion, where you constantly keep incarnating and reincarnating and allowing the same group of spirits to incarnate with, because you're resonating with those spirits, to incarnate within your temple of God and shit like that, because you're giving off those lights, those awarenesses, and those spirits is attracted to that and shit like that. And again, those spirits, they're just in the realm of the fourth, fifth, sixth dimension. They're in the realm of the mind and shit like that, where it's like they're just in a dream, where it's like you in the physical body have, because it's like spirits is so deeply asleep that they may not know how to get out of sleep unless they crash first, a lot of the times, right? But it's really a mental illness, because from a logical standpoint, a person should be able to diagnose or forecast where that pattern of thoughts and feelings is leading them to, because that pattern of thoughts and feelings is going to condense itself through the behavior and create some type of circumstance and situation for that person to experience what they themselves have voluntarily, through their own volition, created on their mind. So it's going to be a reminder for that person, okay, like, why you in that mentality and shit like that, right? So it's things like that, right? So a person with repetitive error syndrome is a person that's failing to self-regulate, course correct, why they are constantly experiencing those same experiences, those same groups of spirits, thoughts and feelings subconsciously that manifest as outward circumstances and situations, and just experiences with, people, places, and things and shit like that, right? So it's kind of like that, because for someone to even abuse anything externally, let's say for example a person is abusing like food or abusing like a substance and shit like that, you gotta understand that it's not the food, it's not the substance, it's the relationship that you have with that food, with that substance, that's built over time and shit like that, right? Where a person might be trying to use that as a form of coping, but it's because of a spirit that they are resonating with, and it's because there's something inside of them that they're not necessarily dealing with, so they end up using that as like a coping mechanism and shit like that, right? That's how you even get the idea of like substance abuse or just overdose and shit like that. Because the people that are like I said, nothing wrong with drugs in general, but you gotta understand like why you jumping into certain things in the first place and shit like that, right? Because you gotta be able to course correct that internal pattern, that internal feeling, allow yourself to exfoliate that, let that shit go. This way you're not, participating in things based upon the same motives, based upon the same reasonings or the same desires that a person may have. This way it's like, okay, you're using that tool as a tool, like using that hammer as a hammer. And then at no point is you trying to use that hammer to hurt someone or fuck someone else up type shit, right? Because it's like, it's just a tool, but you can use a tool to hurt yourself and shit like that. But yeah, with that being said, this is a short video. The video was really supposed to be like 1 minute or 2 minutes, but it's just so many things that you can dive into when it comes to spirituality. With that being said, peace out, everybody. See y'all tomorrow.